Hello and welcome to the Queermonga Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, our advisors, our volunteers, and supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Queermonga Institute's an independent, nonprofit research organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience, following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And as an educational institution, we take an open approach, and we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration. And that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. On these Sunday discussions, we've had a full spectrum of topics, including neuroscience, anthropology, archaeology, art history, mythology, archaeoastronomy, and much, much more. You're welcome to visit our website at queermongainstitute.com. All of our presentations are free, and as a nonprofit, of course, we invite you to become a supporting member, and we want to thank you, the community members, who continue to support the mission of the Queermonga Institute. Today, as we continue to explore the world around us, we need to better understand our place in it, to navigate our path both individually and collectively. We need to correct our course. We need to write a new chapter in the human story for us to realize and to live up to our potential. And of course, our story is part of a much larger story, 14 billion years in the making.
Give or take.
Yeah. And it's time for each of us to embrace our role in this journey. The more we learn, the more we discover, we see an opportunity to embrace a new worldview as we navigate our path forward. And to do this, we need to understand the grand scheme of things, where we fit into that picture. It's what every citizen of the biosphere needs to know. It is the lessons of the grand evolutionary journey on a cosmic scale. And today, we can inspire a clearer understanding with new hope, new potential, and new roles for ourselves.
Tyler Volk, our guest today, he's the Emeritus Professor of the Departments of Biology, as well as one he co-founded, the Department of Environmental Studies at New York University. His books, Gaia's Body, Towards the Physiology of Earth and CO2 Rising, and focusing on those lessons of the grand evolutionary journey on a cosmic scale. His first book, released in 1995, MetaPatterns Across Space, Time, and Mind. MetaPatterns, yes, the term meta, used long before the spatial web adopted it. Meta, transcending, overarching, self-referential, referring to one's own form, genre, ways, and means. MetaPatterns covers just what we've been searching for, to peek under the hood and peer into some of those universal patterns, the palette of forms, the architecture by which nature designs creation. Spheres, sheets and tubes, borders and binaries, centers and cycles, writ in animate and inanimate realms from the macro to the microcosm. Or as Tyler defines it, patterns of patterns. Take spheres so wide-flung that it appears throughout the spectrum of reality, in clouds, rivers, and planets, in cells, organisms, and ecosystems, in art, architecture, and politics. Tyler was writing this in the mid-90s. That was my first radio interview with him then. Such an engaging guide that we had to ask him back for the release of each of his books, and we are a bit overdue for his latest, Quarks to Culture, How We Came to Be. So we continue this exploration of the underpinnings, the dynamics of how we are shaped, we are prepped by evolution, and by we, I mean all of creation. And that's the wide scope that Tyler works in, combining disciplines as he looks at each turn of the rung of the cycle, of the spiral, as we level up the steps of the ladder of complexity. And though evolution is often a roller coaster ride, let's be clear, new forms, new possibilities, new relationships he finds are made possible by the integration and the combination of the existing, what came before. I'm a fan of form follows function, And this goes even further. This is function following the form that precedes it. Tyler, welcome. Good to have you here. Your really long and deep dive into what shapes reality and us shaped your journey, your quest to understand this. So, what was the call to adventure that led you to really seek another roadmap for the unified field theory? Yeah.
Well, when I start the slides, I'll go back 40 years to post architecture school to show you what I was thinking about a little bit back then and how it ties into what we're talking about today. But you did warn me that you were going to ask me about my personal journey, Laura, and it's let me just give a quick review. So architecture school, post-architecture school, exploring patterns of nature, doing some construction, uh, moving to New York City, uh, starting to write a book called Models of Totality, which never got published. And then another book called Being and Boundary, which never got published, but
Catchy
those tied
titles,
in,
though. Come on. Yeah.
those tied into future work. Eventually went to graduate school in applied science to study energy systems. Discovered that the Earth is an energy system using a lot of the same mathematics as used for wind energy and solar energy. Eventually did my PhD on the global carbon cycle. So I was involved with carbon and climate change, and then worked on that for many years. Um, Also got involved with NASA, had grants with NASA on advanced life support, doing mathematical modeling of crop growth and systems dynamics for possible space habitation someday. Got involved through the global carbon cycle with Earth's ancient carbon cycle and how biology could affect Earth's the biogeochemical cycles, what are called
Oh,
the cycles that link biology, geology, and chemistry.
why we breathe oxygen today, right?
Yeah, why we breathe oxygen today, and what role evolutionary innovations may have had in transitions in the carbon cycle over time. That took me into work with what would be called Gaia or biosphere studies, or the Gaia hypothesis. And so I was attending the Oxford conferences that Jim Lovelock had put together on Gaia, doing a lot of writing about the structure of the biosphere. That was my book you mentioned, Gaia's Body, Toward a Physiology of the Earth. So I've always been interested in multiple sciences, the linking of physics, chemistry, biology, uh, the biosphere itself, but also with an eye toward human meaning and the human future. So this was always a concern of mine. It went back to architecture school, involving how people live and how we are living and how we are going to live in the future, and having a better planet. So there's been kind of a thread of human concern merged with multiple levels of science.
Because the better we understand that, the better we understand ourselves, the better we understand our role here. And it's so precious, right? It's so precious. How can we throw this away? How can we
Yep.
slam against the brick wall or go off the edge of no return? How can we do that? There's so much, 14 billion years of intelligence and evolution and life out there. So we gotta own up to it. So okay, so you also started a Department of Environmental Studies because this is the mission. Hey, wake up, planet Earth. You know, we've got a home here that we've got to take care of. So,
Yeah, it's really important. Under the leadership of Dale Jameson at New York University, a environmental ethicist, a few of us started a program in environmental studies at New York University that eventually transited into a department after it proved itself for many years, and is currently a strong department at New York University. And it brings together people involved in this, faculty involved in the sciences, the natural sciences, I should say, and the social sciences, and philosophy and humanities. So it's a very interdisciplinary department, and the students in the department are themselves really phenomenal, for the most part, highly self-motivated and determined to do something for the planet, as well as have good jobs and have.
And to be equipped with the multiple disciplines across the board, that it's all one universe, right? It's all one journey that we're having. So this need to specialize, yes, but also to cross connect the dots, right? To build a picture, to see the web. And that's one thing that you really specialize in. To pull back, you've got to see all the parts, right? All the pieces to the puzzle. And so when did that begin? Because you've been working on that mission for a long time, right? Trying to see the big picture and the interrelations between the parts.
Right, right. So I would say, definitely in college, when I started having particular experiences that expanded my mind to connect with patterns of nature and see myself. I mean, it was the 1960s and early 1970s, so there was a lot in the air in terms of the merging of Western and Eastern philosophy, and just grabbing from the great buffet that we now have available to us. It was nothing compared to what's available now, with the web, of course, but it really seemed at the time that it was, to quote William Wordsworth, bliss in that dawn to be alive, that there was a dawn happening in which we could understand human life to some extent, different ways than it ever had been done before. But that said, I've been very interested through my life in reading some of the great minds of history and following history, and realizing that people always think that, probably not always, not all people, not always, but when they've been alive, they're thinking it's great to be alive for some of them.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if their lives are good enough. These are very difficult things to talk about, because we well, trying to sum up history in a few sentences here. But I just want to say I did have some personal experiences of it. I would say expanded consciousness that led me to some of these visions.
And also the Western Renaissance of a few centuries ago, that was built on understanding and retrieving some ancient knowledge, right? And so we have an opportunity today not only to retrieve that, but also to look at the whole history of the cosmos. I mean, we really are positioned to have another renaissance of unprecedented proportions if we play this right, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I support that. I hope to be working toward that the rest of my life, and try to do that to students I had at NYU, and in books I've written that try to connect the best of the science at the time with the idea that this helps us in many ways. It's not a program for specifically what should be done with a certain political situation, but my firm belief is that with people becoming more spherical in their thinking, and having
There's
curiosity,
MetaPattern right there.
learning their whole lives, that this is a good.
This is a good, and for me, I think it's really that worldview that we need to examine as well. That all of this work really helps to shape our worldview, to understand where we are, what we should do, how we can do it better, right? I mean, it's, and that I appreciate taking this out to the grassroots level as well. I mean, we all need to embrace this knowledge. Don't let it just be in the halls of academia. We all need to embrace this. We're all stakeholders in this planet, right? In this body of knowledge, that this renaissance in its awakening. So appreciate that. Show us your slideshow.
Yeah.
Okay. So before I begin, I just want to say a couple words. One is that I'm going to show you a particular model or mapping of stages of the universe that I've worked on with a certain kind of logic. And I'm going to show you that my interest in it goes back a long time. But I do want to say that there's no way I can touch upon the many scholars that have been thinking along these lines that I cannot do proper nodding to during this. So just want to, for example, I know there's some people from the Big History Association here. I think Brian Swim might be here. I'll mention something about his work later. So there have been many, many people, and my intention here is not to do a detailed compare and contrast in any way, but to say we're all part of a community trying to with somewhat blinders on, grab the elephant in different ways and put together the picture of the elephant. So I will do some nods to some people that influenced me really early on, but I just want to acknowledge the important work done by many others before I begin.
And that so many people are on this thread, right?
Right.
For me, it validates it, that it really is part of the universe emerging its story, making its story evident on so many levels. So it's exciting to see the many
That
threads
combination,
weaving together.
yeah, that weaving of vision together is what's going to bring it all about.
Yeah, with many voices.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that.
I agree. I agree. So do I switch over the share screen myself then at this
Yes, you
point?
can. Yeah, you control it from your side. There we go. We see.
So I'm starting off with something I found recently of my own, a drawing that I did in the early 1970s, shortly after architecture school. And there's a picture of me at the time building a dome that's going to go in the woods so I can study what I study, everything. But I was a little surprised at myself when I saw this picture, this diagram, because it's very closely related to the Quarks to Culture book that I did 40 years after that. And what you see is atoms in the center, and I had molecules, organic molecules going out to cells, cell function, cells, organs. And I want to say just a few words about this, not just that it's a diagram that precedes some of my work in the future, but as you see down at the bottom where it says species, order, phylum, kingdom. Well, I want to point out, it also shows I did not know how to spell the word hierarchy. So,
Okay.
there. And also to critique myself, my logic, even though there's nothing false about this, the organism is part of species and then order, phylum, kingdom, Earth, solar system, galaxy, universe. I would now say that I am mixing logics here, because the part of the diagram in which you see the full circles, atoms are building molecules, molecules build organic molecules build cells. There's actually a physical containing of parts going into systems. Once you go to species and order and phylum, these biological classifications, even though it's true that the organism can be in a species, it's not quite the same. This is now a classification scheme in which the many organisms are in the species. And so it's not the same as, let's say, the organism working as part of an ecosystem. See, I didn't put ecosystem here, for example. So there would be other ways to draw these concentric circles of inclusivity. So I'm saying it's not wrong, but I saw that I am sort of mixing what I would now call kinds of analysis here. And also, I did not have anything human here other than the mapping itself. So I don't have anything about being part of New York City or the United States or a family. So I don't have anything about that. So when I saw this, though, I did ask myself, where did I get this? This was not from architecture school. Some pretty cool teachers, professors in architecture school, but not along this line. And I know it was from the following reading of Teilhard de Chardin, which I'm going to turn to next. I read this book about that time of my life. Many others are reading it too. It was published in the 1950s. There were various printings, French and English. But I put a couple quotes here. I've been rereading parts of it recently, and we see this cosmic building up network, a cosmic processes of organization, the molecules of carbon compounds with their atoms, the cell which contains molecules linked in a complicated system, then the metazoan, the animals in which the cell is an element, and later manifolds attempts to enter a higher biological organization, and now a germination of planetary dimensions. Chardin saw that one could treat a unified, one could create a unified story that included the physical chemical world, the biological world, and the human world as a sequence of nested buildups. Very, very prescient work, important work, and it influenced me a lot. So I'm going to jump now 20 years to my book, Metapatterns Across Space, Time, and Mind, and show you, first to show you this interest of mine continued about scales of nature in a kind of time buildup, and make some comments about this figure from the book, what's and what's maybe lacking from it, at the same time what it does. What this figure shows, it was from the chapter called Layers, and it goes from the middle, in which I look at, I've labeled up and down quarks, and then UUD and UDD. These are the constituents of quarks going into protons and neutrons. And with the electrons, those build chemical elements here, HC and O and iron. And those build up into molecules, NO3, and then you get chemical reactions as you're going on the spiral. And then we get the bases of DNA going into the amino acids, lysine and tyrosine and serine. Then larger molecules, Rubisco, and then Phi-X 174, the first virus to be sequenced. And then there's a chemical, there's the Linnaean name for wheat. And then there's some letters of the Cyrillic alphabet. And finally, one of my favorite phrases, nullius in verba, the slogan of the Royal Society of London, which has different interpretations, but many people say it means something like, don't take other people's words for it. Think it through yourself and be part of a collective.
My father would say that quite often.
Okay, maybe that's why you get some of the good thinking that you have, Laura. Great. So what I was doing here was trying to show how the alphabet, which is going to come in a bit, the alphabet or human labels can be used to start naming things at different scales, and then building a story going outward. At the same time, it's building the scale. Now, I would say, in terms of critique of logic here, in terms of compared to what I'm going to show you, and I do want to say, as my mind is racing in multiple scales, that there's no right and wrong. This is right, and other people's schemes are right, as long as they are consistent within their logic.
Right. Many roadmaps.
Yeah, they're maps, and what the logic is. I was trying to show something here about language and its use to map at different scales. But this is not I brought in the human level here with alphabet and words, alphabet building into words and words building into phrases. So there is a buildup here, but it's not perfectly consistent. So to get more perfectly consistent with what I want to show you for today and discuss for today, I want to turn to Jacob Bernowski, another early influence on me.
Yep.
I hope Bernowski is cool with you.
Oh, yeah. Enjoyed his book early on. Yeah.
The Ascent of Man and the TV show. Yeah. So he had this term, stratified stability, and there he is, a great thinker. And I have a few words from his. So I quote, I refer to him in MetaPatterns. And this is a quote from Bernowski, though. Nature works by steps. The atoms form molecules, the molecules form bases, the bases direct the formation of amino acids, the amino acids form proteins, and proteins work in cells. The cells make up, first of all, the simple animals, then the sophisticated ones, the stable units that compose one level or stratum are the raw material for the climbing of a ladder from simple to complex by steps, each of which is stable in itself. And if you follow his writing on this, he says, this is very much my thing. There's not a good name for it at the time. So he coined the word, as far as I know, stratified stability.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
You've
I would
blown this
not,
into bigger proportions, though, right? You have
yes. So
taken
I'm
this
going to
idea.
turn
Yeah.
to, yes, thanks, Laura. So, and I would say there's some, what I would now consider a mixing of um, logic here. First of all, I wouldn't say that the bases, the DNA bases direct the formation of amino acids. That I wouldn't, I would, as a biologist, I would not use that language. But also, it's not a straight buildup from amino acids to proteins to cells. We don't really understand the origin of life. So there's some ways that I think this could be improved. However, Bronowski, fantastic, fantastic thinker, and I'll bring him up again at the end.
But just that Teilhard and Bronowski were even trying to articulate this vision, the connection of it all. I mean, that's remarkable and so early on, isn't it? That's such an inspired
Totally,
vision.
totally. They saw it.
Yeah.
They saw that one could do um, a science or a scholarship. I'll say not even a story, but with logic to it, to do that. The universe built up in steps. Now, this is within the cosmos, within the big cosmos itself, of course. So this is happening as a concentric complexification. There's many ways to look at complexity, but a concentric building up. Yeah, Laura, they saw it. Brilliant.
They didn't have the words for it, but they were trying to do it in a poetic fashion and trying to describe it. And yeah, it's visionary.
So I'm going to describe the logic that I went through. This is now 20 years after the MetaPatterns book, in which I said, can I come up with can I, well, I just, can I count the steps? But I'm just going to show you what I came up with. 12 levels, and I'm not saying there's only 12, because the step from molecules to the origin of life with prokaryotic cells would have had some intermediate steps, but I don't think they were not well enough defined by science for me to put them in, but they're clearly something there. And I'm going to focus on some of the human levels in this talk, but I ended up having to coin a term for this, for better or for worse, called combogenesis, uh, uh, because I wanted a term for the process. And so it's the genesis of new levels by combination and integration of things of a prior existing level. And I'm going to spend a few slides on the logic of this. So because I'm going to show the concentricness later as I get into a bit more detail of what my own findings were and its implications for thinking about our future will be. And this is the idea. Can you go from things that become combinations on the right? Those now become the things that are independently relating to each other, that combine to form a higher level. I don't mean it's better, but it's a numerically
More
higher.
complex.
Yeah, complex, and a certain kind of complexity in terms of buildup of nestedness. So those black and white rings are showing the actual buildup of levels as I just repeat the little diagram going around in cycles. So it's a cyclic process. And I do see this as really moving and profound in some kind of way, in perhaps a highly generalized ontology in which independent things build to something larger that did not exist until those earlier things built into that larger thing. And then that larger thing can now become a thing. And I'm using the word thing here in a very, very general word. I could use system, I could use holon, I could use, there's words, other words floating around. But thing I'm most comfortable with because I don't know, it's my thing.
Generic.
And uh, and and this happened in physics and then to biology and to social systems. So it's a very general process that transcends any one particular level. And one of the key points here is that the thing at, let's say, level 5 could not have existed directly from a buildup of the things of level 3. In our world, in our universe, it had to go to level, we had to get level 4 first. So you can think of these as stepping stones that had to happen, at least in our world, in sequence.
Okay, can I just ask a question here? So the Fibonacci series, where that is self-referential, that is how nature unfolds, say, the branches on a tree. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8. So it has to build on the previous level to refer back to it before it can get to the next one. So it's a step back before you can go forward. Is that a similar kind of dynamic that you're describing? That I can't jump from 5 to 11 on that sequence. I have to go through the proper steps because each one builds upon itself. Is that a similar dynamic that you're
Uh,
suggesting?
um,
How am I understanding this?
yeah, well, I would say the fact that um, the fact of what you said, Laura, that the previous results get fed like an algorithm into the next calculation
Okay, yeah,
is
yeah.
similar in that sense. But what's not the same is that even though my diagram here misleadingly shows a cycle that keeps happening, as I'm going to show you in the next slide, what's really key here would be different from the Fibonacci buildup. Even though you get 5 plus 3 plus 5 going to 8, and then 5 plus 8 going to 13, even though you get a new number, it's still a number in a sense. Where this, so if you see on the left the things and relations of a prior level, and I've drawn relations there with these dashed lines through a process of combining and integrating, which, by the way, it differs whether it's physics, biology, or culture. The specifics differ, but on the right you get new relations, as I drew them as
You're
wavy
suggesting
lines.
whole new entities, whole new dimensions, whole new
New,
realities, whole new possibilities.
right,
Okay.
right. That is really important to this. And what I did in the Quarks to Culture book with the chapter for each level was to try to lay out in a way that I consistently ask the same questions at each level. How did the combination and integration happen, and what new was born that enabled the next level of combination to happen that could not have happened
Prior.
with the prior levels?
So when we say, what is the origin of life? You can't just say, oh, a few molecules got together and combined with a little heat. You have to say, oh no, the Big Bang happened and that set the stage, that set the womb for this to happen. You have to see it in its entire sphere of potential, right? You can explain life only in the whole grand scheme of things because all of that had to happen before life could emerge and click.
Yes, and I very much like the concept of possibility space. Stuart Kaufman has the term the adjacent possible, which is also a very good term, or opportunity space. That in a sense, after with the Big Bang, all of this was now in potential, was
Right.
there in a kind of a, where does the possible exist? I find that an intriguing question. Um, but what happens in these steps is that is that new zones or arenas of possibility space get opened up that were there from the very first of the Big Bang, but
Mm-hmm.
not accessible.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. So,
So then once I had these 12 levels, they all are a set of, they all share, they belong to this combogenesis sequence, and in that way they're all family members of a combogenesis family, because they all had, except for number one, which we don't know where the fundamental quanta come from yet. Superstring theory is not established. That's still being debated by the physicists. But I started in a way playing games with them. I said, okay, I got a set of things. I can do some scholarship. I can see what's similar or different among them. And they very quickly, and not surprisingly, given the work of many others that are going to, that say similar things, particularly some of the people in the big history mapping and modeling community, they divide fairly sweetly into physical chemical levels, biological levels, and human, well, I like the word culture, use it in a very expansive way. And if and I thinking about what these were, there's different words of this. Some people call about eras and epochs, but one thing I want to emphasize is that physical chemical does not end with the biological. It continues, obviously, and the biological does not end with the cultural. It continues. So these are certain levels. I started thinking were so important in terms of the new. So there's new at every level. There's new dynamics and new relations at every level. But certain levels, the origin of life and the origin of the human, or the emphasis on culture, are so important that they set the dynamical milieu for the next stages of combogenesis and working with those dynamics to still create new things within them. So they are what they call the base levels of these three realms, and I'm naming them the dynamical realms because they all have dynamics, and they're it's like an intertwining. It's like putting in a weaving of something new that now is interwoven. So it's not something on top. It's in a way it's interwoven. And one point that's important here, and this is one of my hand-drawn diagrams, it's not into final form, it was not in the book, is that there are changes within the levels. So for example, multicellularity, if it begins with sponges and goes to advanced animals, that's within multicellularity, but those are lots of sophisticated changes within the level of multicellularity. And the same with the geopolitical state. If we think of the state as going back to ancient Mesopotamia and the other places of the world that the state started, and I'm going to say at the end that I think we're still in the level of the geopolitical state, transiting to something more planetary and new, which then will be why we can bring some of these, why we can bring some of this discussion into the future, which I'll bring up in a few moments. I do want to say there's changes within a level, but then these changes up into something larger are you could separate those, and I was particularly interested in those. So I just want to be clear that it's not that nothing's happening within these levels. Things are happening. So I want to say a few things about some of the human levels. On by count, this was the level 10, and I was calling it the tribal metagroup or human cultural metagroup. And this involves a social structure which is larger than primate groups that tend to have fairly strong in-group, out-group relationships. And and this is also tied to tools and language. And I'm not trying to set time on this, only that we have a cultural evolution process beginning when when humans enabled groups of groups to be the group. And that sounds like it's just the same thing, a group of a group, but the larger size of the human social structures enabled culture and language to be stable. And I'm going to show you that this
And create
term
societies and civilizations,
it
right?
creates societies. And I discovered through the literature that the term for this is not totally set yet. So there's the numbers are, sorry, just the are labels for references, but the word metagroup is used, hypersociality, ultra social, megabands, multibands, metabands, tribes as bands of bands, clans, type 2 superbrain, and we intentionality. I'm very when did the word we come in? And by the way, this is not my expertise. So when I was, in a sense, discovering this through thinking of combogenesis and going into the literature, I did have 4 anthropologists review this chapter. 2 are world experts in hunter-gatherer societies. One was a paleoanthropologist and one was a cultural anthropologist. In fact, I did this for all the levels of the eukaryotic cell. I had experts in those fields review these chapters. One person I did not have in at the time is somebody I'm reading right now, Mark Moffat, and I've been continuing following this up, that a quote from one of his papers: the existence of societies, groups with a definite membership, should therefore be brought front and center in discussion of human evolution. Now,
Uh-huh.
now he does say animals have societies, but something is unique with the human society, Moffat says, in that we've evolved a way of being anonymous, because the groups can be we now have a world of billions of people, and we can, if you feel yourself part of a planetary society, you don't know everybody out there, and yet or you can interact with strangers at a store, and they're not strangers if you see them all the time, but somehow humans learn to have these larger groups of groups, and the hunter-gatherer societies that can share symbols and share food, and can be a couple thousand, can be up to a couple thousand.
Mhm.
So I do see that as really fundamental, and how this ties into our future is that at the beginning of this tribal metagroup, in what I would call the beginning of cultural evolution, we had to be able to be part of several scales socially. I do see that as very important, that we could be part of our daily group and part of at least a larger group of people that we're not seeing all the time, or even maybe very often. Language helps that, because we can have people come to our group from other groups and talk about other people that we know, and get to know them through speech.
I
So
also think another marker for early cultures is that, and we're going to do an exhibit on this, on the power of art as a container for and a universal language for that cultural identity, that cultural wisdom, that cohesiveness to pass from generation to generation to generation and be continuous. I think our sense of time and making a mark that we can pass that forward and backward in time is another key for us humans.
yeah, Laura, like the Paleolithic cave art, or
Right.
any indigenous peoples rock art, or
Yeah.
that I often think when these groups would see some of this rock symbolism or painting, or find something that they did not make themselves, and they knew somebody in the past made it,
And
already.
we can still decode it remarkably well. I know animals are passing on their knowledge from mother to cub, right? There's cultural knowledge that is passed on, how to hunt, how to do this, the lay of the land. But that's a direct relationship, right? Animals can make friends, they're direct relationships. But what's unique about us, and I appreciate that you talking about this, is that we can pass it on symbolically. We can encode this and pass it
Yes,
forward. Yeah,
yes, the term
language and
there that
architecture. Yeah.
yeah, totally. The term is that's used by the experts of cultural evolution anthropology is cumulative cultural evolution,
Yep.
where it really accumulates over time. It really can build on itself over time. Uh, I see agriculture as one of the levels. Many people have said agriculture is very, very important. And it is. From the logic that I'm using actively in my own mind, is what happened here is that plants and animals are now brought into the human life support system, and then this whole system can move itself as a group with the seeds, with the animals, and it can in a sense transplant itself into areas that may have been difficult to live in at different densities. Now, a recent book covering these topics in a really interesting way. I bring this up today because maybe some of the viewers today are
Oh,
read this book.
that is interesting work. They are saying something new, aren't they?
They're saying something new and interesting. They're saying
Yeah.
that first of all these past transitions are not, that there's a lot of flexibility in the way humans organize themselves. In fact, some of these hunter-gatherer groups would go between more centralized social organization and more distributed social organization with the seasons,
Yeah.
and that this group brings in the fact of individual choice, that humans are conscious, obviously. We no one, I don't think, would deny that, but they were actively making choices both individually and as groups making decisions together. So
Yeah.
in case this comes up in some of the discussion later, I did read this book fully recently, and it's really important book.
I think he's also one of them died recently, sadly, but I think they're saying something else that's really imperative for us to understand. And they look at the San Bushmen and they say they're not flourishing as they once flourished. They are living under limitations. And so we can understand that societies have an opportunity to thrive based on their environment, or be under stress, right? And we need to look at our own future. We may be flourishing now, but that's not going to be possible unless we let our planet flourish to support that. I think what they're saying is that it's a roller coaster ride. We grow, we expand, we are constricted, we are limited, we are so tied to our environment. And so we can look at the early societies and how they are now isn't how they always have been in ways
Yes,
when they're under stress now. Yeah.
there is a kind of a warning in that book,
Yeah.
yet the hope comes in by saying we've explored many social organizations, and we may need to explore that again. We need to innovate in certain ways.
We're good at adapting, but we don't always have the chance to thrive. Yeah.
Laura, how am I doing for time?
Keep going.
Okay. One person that they did, the Graeber and Wengrow book did not cite, as far as I think, I did look at this, was Charles Spencer. And Charles Spencer, a curator at the American Museum of Natural History, he reviewed my chapter on the geopolitical states. And the reason this is a combogenesis is because what at one point societies seem to have learned to do was to incorporate other polities that were smaller or of equal size. And this is through the learning how to have an expandable bureaucracy. Charles Spencer studied like 7 or 8 origins of the state around the world, but also fellow Dubril has this term called the specialization of sanction. So there were innovations that led the societies that enabled them to start getting much larger, and in a sense be almost indefinite in size, although we always have to bring in ecological and environmental constraints. So I bring this up just to show you some of the main points that when I said I'm trying to search for what were the major relations, and this has to come up with the way we think about the future, I will say, because well, for a lot of history, the last thousands of years since states were invented, there's been a lot of takeover, and some is done through treaties before there was actual war, but it was very normal for growing empires just to take over some other place and incorporate it into their social structure. This has been and it was an innovation at the time, very successful in a certain sense, but one we have to think about. Okay, putting this all together I'm just going to show a few things. One is that I can now look at patterns within this system, and one that appears is called an AlphaKit, which is when you have small numbers of parts combining. This is the amino acids combining into proteins within living cells, or it's phonemes combining into words in human language within culture, tied to general evolutionary dynamics. And I prefer the term, rather than reproduction or replication, I prefer the term propagation, but I also use variation and selection. I like propagation because it can be more general. It can refer to automobiles, not, for example, not self-propagating, but propagatable. So you'll see in a couple slides this PBS. So I use PBS to be general evolutionary dynamics. And
Okay.
what happens now is that certain patterns, I wrote a paper recently called the MetaPattern of General Evolutionary Dynamics, in which some of these dynamical patternings come in to sort of turbocharge next coming stages of these combogenesis dynamics. And what you see there, the base level with the prokaryotic cell, PCL, and the base level of the human with cultural evolution, you get a new AlphaKit with the language structure and new cultural evolutionary dynamics. And with the origin of life, you have the AlphaKit of genes, bases going into genes and amino acids going into proteins, coupled with biological evolution. And these AlphaKit structures are a way to expand the possibility space. So the molecules are almost infinite in their potential types of molecules. And the same with human words. It's almost infinite in the words we can make with a limited number of phonemes, which goes back to the spiral I showed you, that we can make up words for things we don't even know about that get discovered, and we can call them something because of this adaptability of language, and it's tied to cultural evolution.
I think the universe just likes to expand.
The universe likes to expand in not just physically, but
Yeah.
but in the possibility space again. This idea of expanding in a possibility space. So this is the last slide, not the last slide, but the last slide in this level of detail. I just want to show you that I use this symbol of PVS dynamics as general evolutionary dynamics to do some analysis of how chemical evolution in the molecule led to biological evolution. And one thing that I did not mention in the animal is that learning that comes in with the more sophisticated animals, actually, depending on how you define learning, some people say learning is in the bacteria, but in terms of the nervous system, cognitive learning, that is a propagation, it is an experimentation and honing in on what works. It is a PBS system which goes into the individual human mind, gets charged up and elevated, and now is coupled in cultural evolution. So one point that I want to make that I think comes into our thinking about the future is that I see two major general evolutionary dynamics in the human realm. One is our minds that can think about past, future, can do alternate scenarios of what we want to eat, what college we want to go to, what we want to do after we turn 50 years old, where we want to live, or from the micro scale to the macro scale, we can play things out, and we can, so that's a variation, and we can do selection, and then we can carry through, and in a sense we can propagate. That overly simplifies the complexity of the human mind, but there is well, you can find it in people like John Searle, and you can find it in many people talk about this, that there's kind of an evolution, there's an experimentation that goes on in our cognition, and I think this is going to be important in our future. This gets coupled to what I like to call social evolutionary dynamics, and this can be of many different forms: market selection, hunter-gatherers getting together and agreeing on where to go to next. Single individuals can make decisions that go out to a group. This is a really rich topic that is going on. There's journals on evolutionary economics, and there's a lot of discussion about it. This also ties back to what we talked about with the Graeber book, that we have to think about our choices of how we're going to run our society, and that is the coupling between the individual human mind and the social scale. So to bring this to a close for some discussion, what about the future?
Yeah, what about the future?
So in the epilogue, I make some suggestions of how this thinking of repeating processes that are creating something new. At the same time, there's some repetition or rediscovery of patterns. I sometimes call it a super convergence, to show it's a convergent evolution that is even larger than the standard biological convergence. And before I make those concluding remarks, I want to show the table of contents of the book by Brian Swim and Mary Evelyn Tucker, Journey to the Universe. And this gets back to my point that there are different mappings here that are valid and good and valuable within various people's how they're thinking about it. So for example, I did not mention galaxies forming. I did not mention the stars. I didn't mention the solar system, because I was been so fascinated with in a deep way of this buildup, and can I follow this buildup in terms of what new relations happen. But here you see Brian Swim and Mary Evelyn Tucker, and many of the big history people, some of whom are on this talk, also emphasize the birth of stars. And you obviously needed stars to form to make many of the atomic nuclei, and you needed a star before you're going to have photosynthesis on Earth, before you're going to have life on Earth. So I'm not trying to do a logic of everything that was necessary, but there's different ways of doing the logic. But Swim and Mary Evelyn Tucker, you see at the end, are thinking about becoming a planetary presence, rethinking matter and time, and the emergent Earth community. So what I'm fascinated by is that many people that are looking at the at various logics of the big picture story here are doing it out of a concern for the future. So my take on this, my a few examples, and we can open this up for discussion, is that the concepts I've shown in terms of combogenesis, evolutionary dynamics, the AlphaKits can at least provide a viewpoint. And so at minimum, one would expect, so this is a quote from my epilogue, one would expect that the next level, this planetary scale, the prior innovation of the geopolitical state, namely its capability for unlimited acquisition and merger, would get reconfigured internally into stable relations of nations within the new larger thing. To some degree, this does seem to be happening, and I did say to some degree here, this does seem to be happening. We see that there is over hundreds of years with the Treaty of Westphalia and the Kellogg-Briand Treaty, there's trying to be nations signing on to the sort of the borders being somewhat respected. Okay, and I do say to some degree here, I think this is a work in progress. But we could, from this combogenesis scheme, we might expect more radical changes as well. And for example, might the new level even initiate a new dynamical realm? And that might not necessarily be something we want. Some of the AI people that are talking about putting in evolving systems into technology, and this is happening, it could constitute a new evolutionary dynamics. And so what I think we can do is frame some of these questions, but I did say these questions lead us into considerations about individuals and the planetary scale. Individuals, because as we're in a sense getting subsumed into something larger, that is not always cause for celebration, because we need to think we don't want to diminish the individual. I don't want to go into some Borg state that
Right.
and as we reach this planetary scale, and I'll just end with back to Teilhard de Chardin. He was very concerned in his book about a term he called personalization, and this is happening within human planetization. And also, I'll end with Jacob Bernowski had similar concerns. And
What's
I
the
think
detail of those concerns? Tell us what those concerns are.
well, if you read him, the nuclear bomb, the nuclear bombs really concerned him about the fact that the nations of the world have to learn how to get peaceful. Mm-hmm. And he was also concerned that individuals appreciate the story of how science happened, and how, because he starts off in his book with tools and the way the hand axes were made to be held by the hand, and with the discovery of alloys, and how these new discoveries happen, and that people have to understand this and become better thinkers themselves at the same time as we're going.
We need emotional intelligence along with practical intelligence, right? We need to grow. Yeah. Do you want to turn off your slides? Is that the last one? This was wonderful, Tyler, and I know that a lot of questions for discussion. I just have one. I have two. Polarities. One of your meta patterns is binaries, and polarities, male, female, night, day, the bases, acid, all the polarities. We talk a lot about them and about dualism. They are heating up. So is there a dynamic to help understand the happy relations, harmonic relations between the binaries, 0, 1, all of that, so that we can really move forward in society? That's one question that I've heard in discussion with friends. And another is the stress factors. we attempted to fall back to the former successful strategies. Let's go invade a nation, right? We need more resources. When we're under stress, this planet we are going to face bigger stresses. That's a given. We are going into a time of more stress. You know what they are. What is to help us not fall back on the old strategies that just further the stress, but to find some new solutions to move forward? So those are two things that
Okay. Thanks, Laura.
we're worried about. Yeah. And
Uh,
then let's take some comments
incredibly
and
difficult
questions.
questions. Well, with the binary, with the dualistic thinking, there is something fundamental about it in terms of the minimum comparison has to get made between two things. So in a way, it's the minimum variation to make a selection on. But at the same time, we can get caught on can get caught into an either or situation, particularly with this group, the group, the in group and the out group mapping onto good and bad. So I call that parallel binaries, and I just think we need to be super conscious as individuals. This has to do with the evolution of the individual. We have to start watching ourselves. We have to be monitoring our own minds, and hope that we can somehow through our work of writing books, or the work that you two are doing to try to enlarge this. I mean, we can pay attention to historical examples of triple goddesses, or like trinaries or quaternaries as well, right? So we can,
Yeah.
but there is a really it's such an easy map to do from inside and outside to friend and foe, to map those two binaries together. And that is something we're going to just have to be super conscious about, and everyone's going to have to be working on and thinking about new ideas.
It's interesting to me that the last 30 years, the self-help movement, the consciousness expanding movement has come up to really help us deal. We can all dive into that and partake of that and kind of grow our emotional intelligence is now the new term for that. But it's interesting how the solutions have been here, right, have arisen. That's a sacred duty unto oneself, right?
Yes.
And it's not new. I mean, that fundamentally way back into
The
history.
sages of the ages have been talking about it from time immemorial. Yeah, yeah. But this
Your question about the stress. Oh,
other,
go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. The other one was the stress factors.
Yes.
We're moving into a time of greater stress. How do we help not ourselves not go to the fallback? Hey, I know the solution works. This worked in the past. Let's just bring this forward. But it's just adding to the chaos. So many of the old strategies.
Well, we need positive visions that we can be moving towards.
Yeah.
And I support a goal of world prosperity. I through my work on the global carbon cycle and energy systems, um, we, we have to. And there's many people in the world that are so poor that are in what's called energy poverty. So we need to innovate. We should be able to do this. I mean, we said we should. The biosphere, we can figure out ways to farm better, to use water better, to build renewable energy systems, and to build perhaps there's been some advances in nuclear fusion recently. This is not around the corner. But I think we need to start emphasizing the positive. And I know I'm not saying this out of nowhere, right? A lot of websites are doing this, but the media, the old slogan is, if it bleeds, it leads. And we do need to pay attention to the worrisome things that are happening, right? That's very deeply human as well. But I do emphasize the need for more and more positive visions. Some of the sci-fi is doing this, and so Laura, that's really to not sort of regress, in which I do see as a 3 steps forward and 2 steps backward that's continually happening as we're on this cusp to something planetary and new, to make sure it's not 4 steps backward after a 3 step forward. So I don't have it.
And really to to understand, this goes back to the tribal, in or out. It's really, as Bucky Fuller said, everyone or no one in humanity's final exam. We do have enough resources if we use them well and equitably to all live in peace and harmony. So, I mean, the solutions are here. It's us that's stopping them from being deployed. But let's go to some
Right.
comments.
Well, I mean, as Lynn just pointed out, it all comes down to individual consciousness, and there's new ways to frame it. So maybe that's what you're talking about with the self-help thing, with the whole idea of that we're raising ourselves up not only through education, but maybe through self-development, and that there's some aspect to it that can
Spiritual
happen.
technologies.
Yeah, the things that impact us, and when you go back and looking at indigenous cultures and the way that they came together for their ceremonies and their drummings and their aspects of how they were able to heal the tribe, and they found ways of surviving and thriving,
Flourishing.
flourishing. Now we're at that stage. Whereas when you talk about the size and
Yeah, the
scope,
tribe has just grown to become the entire human family,
Right.
and the web of life. I would say,
Yeah.
the entire biosphere is
Yeah.
our tribe now. And if we don't reach that point, sci-fi movies are so wonderful, right? What was the catch line to The Day the Earth Stood Still, where Klaatu comes and says, the world dies, humanity dies. But humanity dies, the world lives, right? The planet lives, right? We need to be the solution, right?
Yeah.
Not the problem.
for our own benefit. It's selfish. We got exactly for humanity to exist. You're right.
Yeah, we have to grow up, or
Yeah.
we get. I don't worry for life. Life will find a way. I worry about us.
Yeah. And
So-
I'll mention that there's been some tremendously insightful comments in the chat room, but it's been going on for an hour. So if you have a question, why don't we just go ahead and raise our hands? Use the functions of the Zoom session where you can go to the reactions button, raise your hand, ask your questions. Let's have a conversation here, and make it a lot easier than me trying to go back and read everybody's chat and questions.
So who's up first?
Well, Tony has his hand up, and who wants to follow Tony? Get your hand up, and we'll try to get through a bunch of questions and insights and just sharings of ideas. So here we go. Hi, Tony.
Okay, well, hi. Thank you very much. Just a wonderful discussion. I'm just loaded with questions. Maybe I could put out three things really quickly, and perhaps Tyler, you'd pick up on one of them. One of them is that forces are involved as well as the collocation of materials, and I wonder what you think about that. I also wonder about the migration of materials that formed life to Earth from comets. And then I chaired a conference, I think 4 years ago in San Diego, where the plenary speaker talked about how AI is being used to develop AI. So how intelligent can that be? And what is the implication? So, and pick up any or none of those, but
Okay, the first question, you're talking about the fundamental forces of physics?
well, no, I'm talking about energy. I'm talking about dynamics. In 2017, the cover story on Scientific American talked about comets bringing material to Earth and it being processed in many, many cycles through hot springs and geothermal, that sort of thing. I'm just wondering how
Like
something like that,
panspermia?
how that sort of entered. Well, yes, but there are specific processes, and I'm just wondering if you would comment on that at all.
Yeah, so yeah, panspermia would be if cells actually come down from other places in the cosmos, but the materials coming in. Well, the origin of life, I follow as much as I can on it. I'm not actively working on it. It's exciting field. So I won't comment more on comets and the origin of life. But I guess just keep watching the science magazines for that. In terms of forces like energy and matter, I'm fascinated with the fact that at this standard model of particle physics, the forces that came in and the masses of particles and their dynamics, that's still a work in progress in terms of those things being understood. It's not clear whether we will understand them. Well, we will understand them at a deeper level, but dark matter is still sitting out there, for example, as an unknown with great minds thinking about it.
And dark energy, yes.
Yeah, but your third point about the what was your third question?
AI, developing AI.
That
Oh
AI
yeah,
is
yeah,
being used to develop AI,
yeah. So that's something that,
and where will this go?
well, that super concerns me. In a way of that I would suggest caution, because we're inventing technologies that are outside us so quickly that we're not, the ethics and the ability for society to adapt to them are perhaps not keeping pace. So that's this issue I brought up. If an evolutionary dynamics form from the ones and zeros of computer code as the AlphaKit that go up to complex systems, it seems, in some senses you want to throw up your hands and say it's difficult to stop it, but there are committees forming, there are ethics committees. There has to be pressure on the companies doing this work. It is, Tony, it is a big concern.
Yeah.
I believe, I firmly believe.
Yeah. Well, I heard a talk on CRISPR, for example, and that a high school student can now do gene splicing in his bedroom, his or her bedroom, with $1,000 worth of equipment.
Wow.
And that kind of scares. So I also wonder what makes us think that human is the ultimate life form.
Oh, really good question.
Are we part of that evolution?
Yeah. Only the n equals 1 for now. Only
Yes, of course. Well, Tyler, wonderful evocative talk. I really appreciate all the
Thank you,
things you
Tony.
brought up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We appreciate your input always, Tony, for you. Good. Lynn is next. After Lynn comes Monica. So Lynn, you're first. Turn on your mic.
You go. Thanks.
There you go.
Oh, Tyler, you gave me another couple of books to look at. Thanks a lot. You always expand my. Okay, you wrote this book in 2017. I've been involved with Conversations for You for a couple of years. What are you thinking now? If you were to write it now, how would you change how you're writing it? What would you add or take away, or,
Well, right now I'm involved in looking at crossing some of the other meta patterns with the quarks to culture scheme, and trying to do some writing on interactive bordering of systems, and how that changed and how that might give us some insight into patterns coming up in the future.
There you go.
I like that. I think borderlands are where so much happens, right?
Yeah.
So much dynamical turf.
And Lynn's from the international, the group of the International Society for Systems Sciences.
Welcome. Nice to meet you.
So when I hear you say, "Oh, you're working on borders," and I go boundaries, all right, that's one of the patterns, one of the meta patterns, one of the many meta patterns. And if you understand enough of the meta patterns, then you understand more about how everything works. So I'll send you my section on borders so you can look at it. Thank you.
Still wrestling with the terminology, Lynn, on that, because the systems people, you use the word systems boundaries, but the word boundary to most people sounds like it's the enclosure aspect, and that's only part of what dynamical bounding is about. It's also interacting, like our eyes, our mouth, our hands, right, are sort of part of our peripheral body that interacts. And so I was thinking of its and then some of the political science people are using the term bordering for border studies. And then I was thinking dynamical bordering. Well, I'm using the word dynamical too much. Maybe interactive bordering. It gets more complicated to start putting adjectives there. But
I know. I was writing about boundary conditions and relative openness and closeness. It's hard. The language is what we what's his name? Gosh, it's too early in the morning for me. Just a minute. Said in translating from the Chinese, from the Mandarin, that it was very difficult because we use so many nouns, and the Eastern languages have verbs instead of nouns. So our language is very fixed, and it reflects our consciousness. And so it's very hard when we start writing, coming up with the vocabulary for processes, when all we have is the vocabulary for nouns. You know, it's difficult. So it's just part of our shifting consciousness, I think, which is really interesting.
So the systems people use boundary, systems boundary, and no, it does not mean just closure. It means, you know, sort of controlled closure, openness. But then you want to, like the book you're writing, Lynn, for the general public on systems. I know you're thinking through all your terms.
Well,
I've got about 25 terms for boundaries that are used throughout the sciences and social sciences, and everything from membrane to, you know, there's borders and boundaries and walls, and, you know, cell wall, cell membranes, and different kinds of words that are used in the different sciences for the same thing. And then the problem of structure versus process. It's not really a structure, it's all process. So there is a way when I'm writing this book, how can I make this at a very simple 8th grade level, introductory level for all of us, and get these really kind of high level concepts in there.
Drop us a line, because we test us. Use this as a beta tester and give us a talk on this for the general public.
I love that. I will do that.
Brilliant,
I hope to have my first
well-educated
real big full draft done by May 1st.
Oh,
Yeah.
let's stay in touch.
Let's have a talk.
Absolutely.
We'd like to hear about that. And you mentioned the membrane of a cell, and that is such a dynamical membrane right there. It has to decide, what do I let in? What do I let out? What do I do? What am I moving things around? Right? So, yeah, it's exciting turf, the boundaries.
But you didn't answer my question. My real question, I got distracted, is where do you think, oh yeah, you did answer it. Take it back, about 2017 to now, and
the evolution of your research.
5 years of thinking, and it's boundaries. Yeah.
Boundaries. Yeah.
Cross-cutting.
Yeah.
So some shared turf there.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Appreciate it. Good to meet you.
Yeah. Monica is up next. And if you want to speak after Monica, raise your hand.
Monica is with the New Energy
Network
Project, right?
She's partners
and she works
with Brian
Swim.
Okay.
Yeah. So Monica.
Let me put you on screen here. There we go.
I'm so impressed with the way that the way you talk, Tyler, about the process and relations, and that all dualisms sort of dispel and evaporate, and instead we're thinking about potencies, that emerging potencies at every level. And not only are you thinking about that in the human realm, but it seems to me that you're speaking about what it means to exist itself, so that it's not restricted just to humans. You're able to see that in the emergence of the whole universe, all the way down to the physical and chemical realm, in an emerging biosphere. And what Lynn, you were talking about the consciousness that we're in, right? So we're in a consciousness where we see boundaries and we speak about boundaries, and we have all these different ways of speaking about boundaries. But if what we're thinking about instead is relations and potencies, then a whole new consciousness opens up, within which we're thinking about our future, and we're thinking about what we're in right now. And my question for you, Tyler, is, our work is on the noosphere, primarily right now, and particularly in an auto-cosmological way, that we are cosmogenesis or combogenesis, in presencing more of the world through. How do you think about the noosphere, and how would you connect to what we're doing?
Well, I'm curious, since you're actively working on this, could you say a little bit more about The noosphere was the term by Pierre Desjardins, and I think Vladimir Vernadsky also used the term, and it's not a super common term, although probably a lot of people in this session understand the term. But how are you seeing it play into the future, and what is different now compared to a little bit in the past?
Well, the noosphere would be a thinking realm. The universe wasn't always, we look out and we see matter, we see stuff everywhere, and we imagine that stuff as being separate, and pieces and bits of matter. Right. But it wasn't always that way, and it's developing constantly, a constant evolution over 14 billion years. And so we have geogenesis and all of which is cosmogenesis, the universe, and biogenesis, a realm of life that, emerges. Now, we have the emergence of the noosphere. So it's a layer of thought where something holds steady in structure, even if it's not a physical structure, that holds steady with the developing of civilization. And we're born into a world that has cars and skyscrapers and right. And
so are you including material culture into the noosphere concept?
Trade networks and
okay.
In trying to map, what exactly that is, which is a deepening structure of relations. It seems to me it works very well with the way you think.
Well, it does, because even the earliest, once humans could, say, recognize, again, markings or something that came in the past, there's already the potential for a global network. Back in the Paleolithic, the potential is there, and to some extent exists a little bit because people were moving around. So I've wrestled a little bit with the term, whether there should be a term like equivalent to biosphere, but I wasn't sure whether to call it noosphere or noosphere, because that seems to refer a little bit more to the mind. But you do say you are bringing in the material culture, the written things, the language between people, the social interactions, the buildings. And I was playing with the term culture sphere. I didn't necessarily want to make up a term, but noosphere being the sphere of the mind. I'm perfectly happy with that, but I do like the idea of searching for a term. People are using the term anthroposphere too.
This struggle with language does not surprise me. It is just part of us stretching our definitions, looking into these potentialities, seeing what's coming down and wanting to just emerge. It is really that we are exploring this new turf. Right? We need new language. There should be just some universal lexicon of the new terms and what they mean, so we can all get on board and speak to one another clearly on this. Really.
Yeah, it doesn't immediately.
And we're inventing it as we go. I mean, that's an exciting process.
So Monica, do you think that, let me ask you, do you think that if everyone was using the term noosphere more actively in conversation, that this would be a good in itself?
Well, I would first I totally appreciate your point about you cannot, that I do not think of noosphere as mind. I would first dispense with the dualism completely and think of the noosphere as deepening relations and structures holding steady, so that even what isn't really a physical structure is a structure. So it's a established customs. It's that I can understand language. It's symbols. It's that we're born into a collective, not only a collective. It's a collective. But I would dispense with any dualism between mind and matter.
I think you're describing consciousness. Aren't you describing a layer of consciousness?
Well, yes, but consciousness sounds like mind. So I would see matter also is involved. So, matter is in the cell phone, so it's always a mix. There's two aspects for Teilhard. There's a mind aspect and a matter aspect, and but both by themselves would be abstractions. It is both.
Well, we are consciousness inhabiting some physical body, right? We are exactly that merging of consciousness and matter.
Integration.
Right? So
But
you're just saying, let's just create it in a larger sphere, our whole environment.
Yeah, but I don't, even to say that we're a consciousness inhabiting, suggests a dualism. So, to think what is real ontologically is relations and deepening relations. And coming into, and by doing that, we are able to make decisions about what to amplify and what to ignore. And dampen, amplification and dampening of an emerging reality that we are creating that involves, we can study it in science as matter, but it's really auto-cosmological. Does that
So
resonate?
we have a hand. We have a hand in evolution. Do we have a hand in evolution? So how we grasp it and deal with it and amplify it and dampen it, are we actually helping shape it? Is it self-referential unto itself?
For
Are we
sure.
dancing with the evolutionary forces and
Absolutely.
we're part of that process? Is that?
Yes.
Well, we are in cultural evolution. Yes, I just read a book by an Israeli political scientist. He's in his 90s, and it's called Steering Evolution. And even though we've been in cultural evolution for 100,000 years or more, depending on how you define the start of cultural evolution, I'm not trying to debate starts of time about this, but he said because of some of the issues, let's say that Tony brought up about the AI evolutionary systems outside the human body, going into technology, this fellow who wrote the book, I don't have his name on the tip of my tongue, but the book is called Steering Evolution, says we've got to get super active on this of steering the cultural evolutionary process. Otherwise, it's going to steer us, because these potentially disruptive forces, these disruptive biological or purely technological technologies in the bigger sense that are happening, as well as environmental
You can
change.
have the kid in his room changing our DNA codes.
Yeah, exactly. It could be very cheap to throw huge disruptions into the world, which is the case with nuclear weapons too. It's relatively cheap to create global havoc, which I think that motivated Bernowski a lot. Margaret Mead was very motivated by that fact that now it's
Showtime people.
To do. So I'm a great fan of the human race, that we can figure this out. I guess because I read Nature and Science magazine each week, I just see these discoveries that keep getting made by all kinds of smart people. So, but without being overly simplistic about the forces that are coming into existence that are nascent and growing, that are being very disruptive, without being naive about it. At the same time, I think I guess for me, the proper moral stance is to be super concerned with an optimism at the same time, to try to personally go in an optimistic direction and spread it to other people at the same.
So more of my father's wisdom: expect the best, but be prepared for the worst.
Yeah.
Oh wow, Laurel,
Well,
lucky you.
Yeah, she had an amazing dad. Brian wants to join in with Monica, so I'm going to put Brian on as well. Brian's fine.
Thanks, Paul, and Tyler. Thanks so much. I mean, I've admired your work for 40 years. Can you believe how fast it went? Wow.
Same. Yeah. Same.
And the care and the way you've brought together such fantastic ideas. I just love all of it completely. But I was wondering, you also mentioned, you said there's some positive sci-fi visions. I mean, I think all of your work is positive, but I was curious about what sci, you did say that, right? There are some positive visions come.
The one, the one, um, well, how concrete are you asking that question? I mean, I mean, how,
Well, I guess I, my, there are a lot of dystopian visions being delivered by Hollywood, and that's fine. But I'm actually looking for positive films that have a vision of the future that's exciting.
I think you two should
I
be
thought
writing
maybe you had a
some.
couple of suggestions.
in terms of the actual, yes, the books that would not be on the, not be off rolling off my tongue now. I mean, there are people talking about, I'm sure you're aware that technologically we should be able to, figure out how to have the world prosperous. I mean, just if you take the solar energy flux, which is many thousands of times more coming onto the planet than human energy use is at the current time, and water, there is a lot of water if we learn to use it well. It's not in any particular place, but I'll give you. There are discoveries being made to try to upgrade photosynthesis. I guess I would be not I guess I would be a proponent on getting agriculture to be super efficient, so at the same time we can preserve we can have E.O. Wilson's half Earth vision and preserve a lot of planet at the same time. It's not just we do need technological advances. At the same time, we need political will. So I guess if I were to frame it, Brian, I would say the biogeochemical cycles, my reading of them is that we should be able to fit ourselves into this planet and work with the noosphere biosphere connection in a way that is going to be okay. Now with global warming and the CO2, I find myself, I cannot be like we're coming to an edge type person. It's something we have to be super concerned about. We might have to start bringing down the CO2 at some level, but I can't allow myself to go into a kind of a doom.
Right, because then you've given up. Right?
Yeah, then it's given up. It's something we have to. Again, when you see what the discoveries are being made at all kinds of levels, from the microbial and biochemical to the cosmological, we should be able to figure this out, Brian. But I'd love to have your feedback, because that's probably a kind of a simple, kind of an overly simple way of thinking about it. But it's my way of kind of keeping a drive of connection going, of the hope for the best. I'd love to hear you say some more yourself about this.
Well, I think I would agree. I would agree with what you've just said. You said it better than I could.
And I guess I'd be curious, in your, since you've done all this work, Brian, that I admire, and that you've been motivated, that the cosmic story, the big history story, is somehow a good to know about, and I'd love to have a little conversation with you about that, just if you wouldn't mind, how you frame that, because sometimes to me personally, thinking these things through, I feel it's done me good personally, from my own sort of seeking to center myself as a human in this amazing universe. It's not just scientific discoveries, but there's something almost getting imbued with a larger sense of purpose and connection by knowing this. Is that how you would, or could you add to that in your own way?
Yeah, well, I would just say that I sort of, my mind was just blown when I learned the story of the universe, and also I kept reminding myself that, we've been on the planet, humans have been here for what, 200,000 years, let's say. And we just learned all this.
Yeah.
Like yesterday, and I love the way you brought up Teilhard de Chardin and Bernowski, two amazing geniuses that just saw this. And I just think when we really take it in, it'll be a very different human species. I sort of like the idea that we are the species that reinvents itself.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't change our anatomy, but we develop a new toolkit, and so our presence and our way of, as Monica was saying, our way of relating is new, and I think we're right in the middle of a very, very deep transition. I was interviewed yesterday by an 11-year-old girl. She was putting together a project for her class, right? And it's like due tomorrow, so she desperately found me to interview. But what blew my mind was, so I gave her, like, in 20 minutes, I summarized for her 400 years of modern science. When you could even say, I summarized like 200,000 years of human evolution in terms of the knowledge. And so here she is, she's 11, and she basically knows the same thing I do now. Like, what is she going to do with that? So I just had the sense that she's going to be in a very different place. And,
that's why these conversations and all the work that all of you are all doing are so important, because we try to move the dial through dialogue, but to reset our worldview. You talked about catastrophes. Insects now are disappearing. There's so many pollinators out there. Insects are one of those canaries in the mine. Insects have such a huge role. They're disappearing. We barely notice, right? We need to leave nature be nature to support it. We need to not mow our backyards and pour chemicals on it and try to go with the Japanese garden and let it be, as opposed to the English garden, right? We need to support what nature wants to do itself. So to reset our own aesthetics, our own values, our own ways, our own what's real, what's needed, what are we doing here, what do we value? Yeah. So I appreciate all that you all are doing. Let's just
let me just say one thing.
Let nature
Laura,
teach us, appreciate nature and its lessons.
I just have to say this, that the very fact that you found your way to Tyler years ago and have been featuring his work says everything about your own deep understanding. He's carrying on the work of Teilhard and Bernowski, and you found him way back. So it just says a lot about the work you two are doing.
Well, we had a chance to go on radio, and growing up in a radio family, I had access, and I thought, what are the conversations that I'm having that I'm not hearing out there in the mainstream? How can we bring this into the mainstream? How can we make this exciting and accessible and actually bring focus on that? So we did start early on trying to bring this. And Monica, I have known since the very beginning of our radio days. And so this is what we all talk about. Why not the rest of the world? Get on with it, people. And I think, and I know, Tyler, your partner is in the solar field. And I'm thinking, we wouldn't be in the political dire straits that we are, the geopolitical, economic, threat that we are facing, human life we were facing, if we had let Jimmy Carter keep those solar panels on the White House, if we had we knew about solar power in the 70s. Why weren't we on with it? Why wasn't our worldview and our eagerness to create a world that we can hand off to our children that's intact, that will continue the story of the 7 billion years, right? We're handing them such a legacy. Why weren't we doing this, 50 years ago?
So now we have to correct our
we could have been the world leaders, America. Come on.
Yeah.
Where were we? Yeah, thank you, Greta. Our house is on fire. What are we doing? So I think that these conversations
things are
are so
gone
necessary because we need to have the vision, the imagination, the noosphere. We have to let it in. We have to open the bandwidth to let it in. So I just want to thank you all for everything that you're doing, and all of our many guests and our audience who are doing things in their world to bring it forward. So
And what you're saying, there's a balance, and we realize these mistakes, these opportunities. We're at a crossroads, and we keep missing these crossroad opportunities. Hopefully, we're coming back around now. We can correct our navigation in time to make the necessary corrections that are for us to move forward. So this is the this is the
humanity's
challenge.
on the big hero journey, and the clock is ticking. Right, the bomb's about to
This
go
is the
off,
hero
and we've got
journey.
1 minute to midnight. Right?
Yeah.
Are we going to save the day?
Yeah.
Like, what is it?
This isn't a Hollywood movie, but we hope that we can save the day in the last.
Well, we talked about sci-fi and
Very cool.
our fascination with superheroes. Yeah, try the power within. So.
Yeah. So I was going to mention, Monica has mentioned that you, Brian, and Monica will be coming on at some point in time, and we'll have another discussion with the two of you, and we'd love to have that. And Monica's been updating us with your current video projects and very, very exciting work. And so we're really happy to be connected and to be able to share it with you.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
All right.
The new story,
Yeah.
the new chapter emerging of the universe.
Monica, did you have any final thoughts before I move on? No. Okay. Blessings to you, kid. Yep. And you too, Brian, and back here to Tyler. Any other questions you want to ask? This is your time to raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll continue our discussion. Go ahead.
So, so you're working on borders and boundaries, and what is your spiritual take on this? Because for us, that sages of the ages, right? That eternal wisdom, that ancestral wisdom has to come through when we open up the bandwidth and actually get out of our rational linear mind.
Right.
And that we can step back and go, there's a dialogue with the universe, if you allow us to speak in this mythopoetic language. There's a dialogue with this whole evolutionary process that is shaping us and challenging us. Right? What is you alluded to
The
an
fact that
awakening that you had.
you had an awakening in the 70s, and that's an important part of it, because we get into the science, and there's so many stories that of significant scientific discoveries that go back to those moments in time of personal journeys of some sort.
Well, you've been quoting Teilhard. He was a spiritual man. Yeah.
Well, what would you like me to?
We had a biographer, Bucky Fuller, talk about his mystical moment awakening.
Yeah, the mystical moments of awakening.
Well, I would like to say, if anybody's, it's impossible for me to follow the chat, by the way.
We don't expect you to.
So if anybody would like to say something, I'd love to hear. There is one hand up, but I'd love to hear that. But Bucky Fuller. I'm a tremendous reader still. I don't know what to say about my, without getting into details of how I think about the brain and consciousness and things like that. And I'm not an expert on it, but I do see. I don't see consciousness as separate from the brain. I do see us, but I don't. These are difficult issues of free will. They'd be fun to talk about if you'd like to sort of have a back and forth on these things.
Well, that's why we call it conversation for exploration. We don't expect every discussion to be that you be an expert in that area of research. Otherwise, we'd have no discussions at all on these Sundays.
Let me ask it this way: what do you think the next stage of evolution is delivering? What does it look like for you? What is where are we going? What do you imagine in an ideal scenario?
Well, what it looks like for me is for grossly materially everybody on the planet having an opportunity to live a prosperous lifestyle. So that's going to mean high-tech advances across the board, from agriculture to energy systems to water, because I don't think a vision of billions of people remaining in poverty. I mean, for me, and some being well off, like we all are pretty much on this discussion group today. That if billions are in poverty, that's a dystopic vision itself, and it probably would lead to dystopia anyway. I think you had Martin Rees on your program recently. Is that
Well,
right?
but we had Martin Rees on back in the early 2000s.
2000s,
We have been in touch with him, and there's a possibility of him
I
coming back
see. I
on.
see. Because his
Yeah.
new book on the future is really good, by the way. And so I read that recently. But he talks about the knowledge that people have of each other around the planet through the internet, so everyone knows how others are living their lives, and that's part of it too. I do support um, being in nature a lot as much as possible, and being connected with people at the same time. I do believe in having balance in one's life, and trying to have deep personal experiences. I mean, it sounds like very easy to say. These are personal matters, of course, but one I mean, even some of the work I showed today with the levels of nature, they end up being almost my personal piece of sculpture I can think about when I'm
Right.
walking in the woods. Is the the infinite possibilities of what the molecule was, for example, what the molecule is, the molecule level that could lead to complex enough chemical reactions that could lead to life in a way we don't really understand yet. But that's the idea of the biochemical origins of life. I mean, I don't want to know if we want to go into the simulation hypothesis, but
Oh, the simulation hypothesis.
so,
That's growing, right? We're hearing more and more about that. I mean, maybe it's The Matrix, the movie, jump started that thought.
Right.
But
I guess for now I take the view it's not going to, whether I believe that or not, it doesn't change. It's not going to change my life of having to decide what I'm going to do tomorrow. And,
Yeah.
we have
Well,
a,
it's the passion that drew you into the world of becoming a professor, becoming the level of research that you've gone into. It's that personal passion, and that's the stories that we all want to hear. Nothing worse than a dry professor dictating facts without something personally connected to it. So we love the fact that you're here and your passion bleeds through in such a strong way.
we will
yeah,
be
thanks.
talking
Thanks. It
about-
wasn't just a way to earn a living. Yes, right. It wasn't just. A,
Yeah, it doesn't pay that well.
We will be talking about nested dimensions with Shane Farnsworth from the Max Planck Institute
Okay.
next month. He says mathematically, when you start to sort out the math as that universal language, either 11 dimensions or 22 dimensions makes all that they know fit into a nice order, right? He says it requires extra dimensions to make the math work. Now, isn't that intriguing?
Yeah.
That is intriguing.
Yep,
Yeah.
that should be interesting to hear about that from the next.
Yeah, so
As
who
I said,
knows?
I left out any supersymmetry or superstring out of my books. The books I've written, I've tried. My aim has always been, at least in the back of my mind and the front of my mind, since we're having this open conversation now, my aim has always been, or my feeling has always been that assembling known facts that are probably not going to change too much. So in my book, CO2 Rising, everything I said in that book about the global carbon cycle still holds because it was known well enough to assemble. Now, some of the numbers may jiggle a little bit, and one can follow their ups and downs in the literature, but the basic picture doesn't change, of us as carbon processing beings, for example, right? That we are carbon fueled beings. We're not going to discover tomorrow that we're really, phosphorus fueled beings, whatever. We need phosphorus though. So we understand some basic things about the human metabolism, and then tying that into the Earth metabolism was really a passion of mine, to see myself organically as part of the large biogeochemical cycles. I drew the line at the Earth being alive. So some of the
Gotcha.
yeah. So I drew the line at that. but again, it depends on how one's defining life. I was happy to say that there's a metabolism in the biosphere, but not that the biosphere is alive itself. And the reason I drew the line there is because um, and I also drew the line at this is a problem of words again. Does one use the word evolution in a really general sense and say that there's been evolution from the Big Bang? There's clearly big changes. I prefer, even though I think it's a losing battle, uh, to use the word evolution for specifically when there's populations of propagation, selection, and variation. It doesn't mean at all it's competition at all. It doesn't necessarily restrict itself to that, but one can see that in biology, there is, well, biology, Darwinian evolution, and that this is also true in culture, that we are making choices of what to, well, let's say very, very, base wise, just what to buy is causing evolution of products by people selecting them, and that had to be true back early. All cultures are making decisions of those kinds, but those decisions are not being made in a kind of a blind, so to speak, biological way. They are being made consciously, which is why I like to see the cognitive evolutionary dynamics is playing in. And in terms of the human future, I think we have to get better about making making decisions. There's a lot of research happening in cognitive neuroscience about human decision making, and the way that that way biases come into play. Probably heard of like the Kahneman, Tversky work with human biases, and other people working on biases. That this is something that should be known also. So that would feed into improving people's decision-making abilities to kind of catch themselves about when they may be making a decision based upon
because evolution set us up to function in a much different environment than we have today, right? We have these imperatives still at work on us, pushing us this way and that.
Yeah, and we have to get a lot better of it. So it's not going to just be a matter of innovating in our agriculture. So I think that this is going to go. It has to go part and parcel with the individual, and particularly I keep bringing that up about the individual because I do see the fact that as we go planetary, the individual human body in a sense gets buried one more level deeply as this nested complexification is happening in a sequence. So you can look at the cells of our body are now not able to just go out and live by themselves out in a pond, right? So they've lost something, but the cells of our body have also gained something. So one thing I did, see Monica has her hand up again, and maybe somebody else. One thing I did as an exercise for myself was to try to take the various levels, like going prokaryotic cell to eukaryotic cell to multicellular animal social groups, and take some of the main process innovations that happened there and map them onto nations going planetary or people being part of something different. So thinking of a person being like a eukaryotic cell going multicellularity, or thinking of a person, a cultural conscious person being now part of a different kind of social group. So doing these as thought experiment exercises to help one brainstorm some potentially new avenues of thinking about borders and binaries and layers and centers and decentralized versus that.
I want to say something about language before we go to Monica. Okay. I just want to say that, as an English Lit major, that's the extent, college degree in English Lit. But I love talking to the scientists. I love talking to those who are very precise as you were describing your language. But I'm a generalist also. And so I'm not an either or, I'm more of the yes and all of the above. And so I believe there's room for all of those expressions. So to say Gaia is alive in a mythopoetic way, for me, is just as valid as your very precise descriptors, and you're drilling it down into exactly how all these systems work together and self-regulate and all of that. I think there's room for all of it, and that we need to discern in what lingo are we speaking, because myth has so much importance to the soul and to culture and to our identity and to our imagination and to that non-linear, non-rational brain of ours,
Right.
and to inspire us and to really connect us emotionally and with the heart to our larger sphere. So I really want to say that all of the above, all the dialogue, it's the biodiversity of the universe, of a healthy ecosystem within the human culture. We all need to have a voice, and we all have something to contribute, and we all have these various ways of
Laura, so let me
language.
ask you.
So I want to just defend that. Yeah.
So let me ask you then, but then where does critical thinking come in, or where does defining terms come in?
Because one is not displacing the other, right? One is, I'm not saying that Gaia is alive is going to displace and shove out the door everything that you've done. I'm just saying we need to know when we're speaking in myth and when we're speaking in the scientific terms, and we need to be multilingual. We need each of us to be multilingual and understand the metaphoric, the metaphor. Yeah.
Within the field of
The poet.
academia, you need to do what you're doing. I mean, that's what has to
Exactly.
happen.
You need to do
but there
what
has
you
to,
do.
There has to be that almost like we tell children stories to bring them along and teach them. It's sort of like we have to have this. We have to have a poetic language, and you know.
And you can't mistake it. You're a fundamentalist if you mistake the myth for the literal truth, right?
Right.
But there's a place for that.
Well, and that whole concept of
A place for myth.
Well, where's the place for a story of a warlike society that ancient Sparta or that it believes in takeover of others, and their stories are about the meaning of human life is that, and
but we're operating under that.
Huh?
We need to look at the baseline of what we're saying in the culture and the way that we live it, right? We're not looking at the meta underlying patterns of our own culture and our own worldview. And I think that's what we need to look at. What are we really saying? What is the underlying meaning of what we're doing? We need to grapple with that. We need to speak in mythopoetic terms in order to understand what we're saying in a society and its underlying.
So do you think that
basis.
what I'm doing is mythopoetic in a way?
No, God, no. I think there's absolutely. I'm just saying we need the mythopoetic alongside the hard sciences, right? We need to be well versed. I'm saying there's room for all of it.
Because what I'm doing, one of the things that I personally question sometimes, boy, I feel like we're just sitting around a living room talking now, and this is going to be recorded. But because what I'm doing is not. And let's say Brian's journey of the universe it's not it's not an equation that's going to tell you something about how clocks change if you take them up into the cosmos, or it's not a new cancer drug, so it's not and yet I feel that, so it's not science in that way.
You're philosophical.
It's philosophical. Sometimes I identify with the term natural philosophy, natural philosopher.
Thank you. That's it. Yeah.
Where it's
That's a
tying
very good
into meaning. So in some ways, I would say what I'm doing is mythopoetic in a certain sense.
Well, yes, it is, because you're talking about what does it all mean, and right there, what does it all mean? You're right there.
And yet I'm on this line where I don't want to tell others what it means. I want to try to frame like an ontological
new questions,
set of processes that help. See, even that's a little presumptuous, but that others can use to make some meaning.
You're framing some new questions, and
It's
you're
it's a
because why are
framework.
we doing all this if we can't explore what it all means? You know,
Right.
the who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? What does it all mean? Those are the eternal questions, and there's so many. We're creating a mosaic to help answer it, right? And we
And
still
so
haven't gotten too far as a human species, have we, to answering that?
tell me you can tell I'm getting engaged because I start interrupting you, Laura. I apologize for coming
It's
in.
okay.
Oh my God, no! But
But I,
Monica
but
had
I,
her hand
but I
up.
do,
Yeah.
but for example, I do think if when we're thinking about boundaries of things, of all, take all things and put them into a bin of examination. By thing, I mean the
Thank
very
you.
general,
Yeah.
conceptual, and
All
just
of it goes in the bin.
start walking around. You can put yourself into a mystical state, which I haven't used that word yet, but you can put yourself into a mystical state by walking around and thinking about the biological boundaries and cultural boundaries and physical boundaries and boundaries in my daily life. And you can really one can work oneself up into a state of positive awe at this.
But isn't that the whole point? Isn't that why Newton started
That's
to
what-
explore God's handiwork for the awe, for the spiritual quest of it?
It's
To answer those
it's a
eternal
lot of
questions?
it's a
Isn't
lot
that
of
the basis of science?
Yes.
Yeah. Awe, look at Einstein. He had plenty of awe beholding the universe. Yeah.
Definitely.
I don't want to listen to a
But-
scientist that can't embrace the bandwidth, right? That can't embrace the human side, the awe and the wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Give me the scientist who's well-rounded and has both, and who can talk about the meaning of
And
life.
passion, like I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
The journey's passionate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Does
Thank
Monica
you, natural
wanna-
scientist, as you
Yeah.
are.
Sorry,
Natural
Tom.
philosopher.
Got me
Yeah.
going here. Okay. Does Monica want to say something again?
I do.
Come save the day.
All right, my ears perked up when you said that you would stop short of saying Gaia was alive. And so first off, I think that perhaps the distinction that we make between dead and alive has too much significance.
Thank you.
Okay, but and perhaps I'm speaking, metaphorically here, but I think it's more about you use the word hyper. So if we're speaking about relations, we're not necessarily speaking about meta. In my mind, it's a little bit more hyper, and I can imagine easily in a way that is like the same form, the same, like looking at the patterns themselves, that the noosphere that we're speaking about is actually like a beast alive, and that we are part of it. So that, when Teilhard speaks about something like unity differentiates, that as I become increasingly differentiated, as I become increasingly an individual, I am part of a whole unity that is the emerging noosphere, and that is a beast, and it's alive as a whole.
And then I'm not alone in the universe when I think of it in those terms. And this is not a cold, dead clock of a universe running down where the creator has
part
left
of
the
a-
building. That's the
Yeah.
universe I want to live in, a living universe, right?
And not created by an outside creator.
Understood.
Right.
But
You know,
but our
that-
Western worldview is trying to do that, right? It's trying to.
Yes,
Yeah.
because we
Separate.
think
And that's where a lot of
dualistically.
our problems
we-
come from, in my opinion. Tyler.
So, I mean, I'm not going to focus on that, but I can imagine that.
Right, well, I think this. Well, and you're not saying if it's a beneficent beast or a dangerous beast, and yeah, poets have probably frame it different way. Well, hey,
A good beast.
something larger. Well, culture. I guess I see it as culture. Culture is between human communication and education and the material thing and words, and even Bruno Latour has this term of actor network theory. The French philosopher, sometimes sociologist, depending on how what he's called, but he's sort of an interdisciplinary thinker, great thinker. Actor network theory that had a big influence on sociology. That even the material things are parts of our mind, because they're parts of what we're interacting with, and they teach us, and they have patterns, and we use them, and they're part of our memory systems. And the Stanford archaeologist Ian Hodder has a really interesting book called Entanglement, about the history of human entanglement with material things. And this actually has to be thought of as part of our social milieu, part of the beast, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm fine with, so there are different uses of talking about the biosphere being alive as well. I um, I do like animal societies. Many animal societies, anthills can stay alive for decades and decades and decades as individual ants are coming and going, but the hive stays. The hive stays there. And this gets into issues of group selection and whether it's subject to direct evolution, because the things that can die as a whole can function. This is a bigger discussion, but I do see a distinction between things that can die, end as wholes versus not end as wholes, and that can happen culturally. Products can end. The Beatles can break up. Of course, we can still listen to the Beatles when we want, but we're not. But we talk about bands breaking up, and corporations can end and go into demise. So I definitely see evolution happening in a more ways to derive inner function when the things can be subject to life, what I call life-death dynamics. But then there are the immortal things. The biosphere has been alive with its active metabolism for billions of years since the first cell. So there could be different ways of framing this, and the mythopoetic way, if that's sometimes referring to anthropomorphizing or putting into kind of putting animal type being and projecting it onto the non-living. And Monica, you're saying let this whole living non-living thing is fuzzy. In the end, I'm agreeing with you. I'm not going to say that this is some hard line that we should try to draw and stick to, and I'm going to treat you as an enemy if you insist on calling that rock alive, right?
No, I think the more important distinction is part and whole, rather than dead and alive.
Yeah.
No, I would rather emphasize that distinction.
I would also like to say, if we're not going to embrace our ancestors, our ancient ancestors, and try to pull their wisdom forward, we need to access that. We need to speak in their language. They weren't speaking in scientific terms. They were speaking in poetic terms. They were speaking in myth. They were speaking in art. They were speaking in direct experience. They had many ways of communication, and all of those are part of us. All of those are a piece of our psyche, of our dialogue, of our we need to embrace all of that.
I agree, Laura. So I personally love doing lots of reading about and visiting the archaeological sites when I can. I see some more hands up. I don't know if you want to keep going.
To say everything is sacred. Yeah. To understand everything is sacred, you need to understand how the ancients meant it. Go ahead. Do we have more? I'm willing to go.
We normally go for a 2-hour thing, but we'll keep going because it's that kind of a discussion.
Yes.
Just following up on this concept of the ancients that you were referring to, I'm currently editing an audio interview that we did with a Lakota man, Thomas Horse, and he talks about the worldview, the cosmology of his people. It's just fascinating. And so he does the honoring of directions, of connection to all of life around him in his Lakota language. And then he tells us in English the best he can, even though he says Lakota does not translate into English. They do the best to tell us what it means. So and it just gives me chills. There's so much power in that tradition of understanding of that worldview. So that's maybe a little bit of that mythopoetic idea of concept, but it's
and
the
that
idea.
was referred to earlier by that lovely woman we want to talk more with.
Oh yeah. Lynn.
Lynn, thank you.
Right.
About Tibetan verbs versus nouns.
Sure.
Right. We construct our language dependent on how we view the world.
Okay, I'm going to go look at all these hands that are up. Monica, did we satisfy? Thank you so much.
You.
Yeah, I'm going to take
points.
you off screen here, and we're going to jump on to John Berger. John can. Okay, I'm going to ask everybody to be succinct for us so we don't go on and on. But if you could just get to your. Hi, John.
He's doing overtime for me.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm very fascinated with this conversation, and I just wanted to ask a question. I think it was Tyler, you mentioned at one point talking about it in terms of holons or holonical. And it seems like the term level, sometimes you could think of level as sort of a cross section or a strata. And then the lower levels were oftentimes in our, capitalist culture considered as things for our use. And that obviously leads to the death of, like, for example, the coral reefs or phytoplankton. We need those phytoplankton breathe, so it's almost as though, how can you speak about this idea about levels as existing in relationship to, say, like systems theory, so that that the differentiation of the levels is not building on one on top of the other, but that they're somehow they remain interrelated. And I think what the Cuyamonga Institute is so good at relating is this concept that exists in indigenous cultures and going back to millennia, that people had an understanding and a ritual practice of staying in touch with this relational aspect. So could you say something about that?
Well,
Thank you for your question,
yeah,
John.
it's a problematic term. I agree. Would you suggest another term? I mean, Lynn Margulis, the biologist, she used to really dislike this higher, lower levels. Levels start leading themselves to higher, lower real quickly, which is another binary we have to be, we should,
Right.
try to
Confusing.
dismiss. So, John, do you have maybe a suggestion for that terminology?
I think it's something that Monica is really referring to, about the term holon. Arthur Kessler came up with. He said,
Yep.
I don't like to come up with terms because people will laugh at them. So coming up with a new word, it sounds like we're coming up with something that didn't exist before. But it's like Lynn Margulis is a great person to bring up, because she kind of says, she lifts up a handful and says, people call this goop, but this bacteria sort of did all the heavy lifting. It's like build back better. Well, let's think how bacteria manage to do things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, that's a great question, but I'm not putting it off, but I don't have an answer for you in terms of one word. But the word holon, for example, seems to be moving in a direction, but still participates in this same sort of dualistic idea, but maybe it's not. It means
it could participate in it depending on how you look at it. But yeah, I do like the term, and what Monica brought up, that a key meditation is part whole, which would be think of as kind of a MetaPattern or a generic pattern of basic ontology.
Nested holes.
Nested holes, nestedness.
I like that.
Nested networks.
And
nested
what's sitting
networks.
at the center is that first level.
Yeah.
Nestedness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John,
Nested.
thank you.
Good point, John. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Good
Thanks.
work.
Insight.
Good work. And let's
Yeah.
give Michael a chance here. Michael, can you turn on your video and join us with your microphone on as well? Your hand is up. Michael, I'm going to
Go back to
I'm
Lynn.
going to go to Lynn. Michael, you can follow up afterwards if you still want to ask your question. Your hand is up. But Lynn's ready to go, so let's take Lynn.
Hi. First of all, it's always a pleasure to hear Tyler, and I'm really enjoying you guys. You're wonderful. I want to make a quick comment on John's comment about hierarchy. And we're so accustomed to seeing hierarchy in terms of like a ladder, but hierarchies in nature are formed with nodes, hubs, super hubs in networks.
Oh, I love that.
And so it's a networked activity that involves emergence from level to level.
Yep.
So once we understand that, then the arguments stop. And I have to just call it hierarchy and just change the way we look at it, because the language is so difficult, it can't keep up.
Yeah.
I just have to make decisions when I'm writing my thing. That's all I've had to do throughout the thing. And Tyler's helped with that. What I see, and when you brought up Earth is living, when you brought up and I know Tyler and biology and life and all that, that science is extremely important and very interesting.
Yes.
What I see it instead of is seeing that they're all systems with the same processes, and that those processes, if we have the new words and we have these processes better understood and defined, they would transcend all the sciences and help us explain and grow our understanding of ancient stuff throughout time. Every single process I've written about in my book is well described in the Torah, in the Bible, in Hawaiian culture. I live in Hawaii, Hawaiian cultural processes. It's all there. So I think it's just a matter of transcending and then understanding how we really operate and getting away from the power and control and the fear and the Putin driving kind of consciousness.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's
I so appreciate that.
But that I really appreciate Tyler's grasp of that and his language. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. And Paul, I just want to say one
I want to hear more
about the
what you
Lakota.
have to
Thank you,
share.
Lynn. Thank you, Lynn, for that. Having some great talks with the systems people. But Paul, what you about the Lakota, I do agree, it relates to Lynn too about meaning, is that the indigenous and ancient peoples were really good at connecting the outer world and the inner world and bringing them into, seeing correspondences. And I do think we need that. I want to, I'm willing to go on record that I think really,
I knew that.
but really that what you said, really important. That sort of microcosm, the inner outer connectivity there, that relationship.
Thank you. And to build on that, I think that our age of science and all that we're doing to look so deeply into the structure of the atom, to look so deeply into theoretical physics, to look so deeply in the astronomical level, to extend our senses so broadly, to pick up more data about what this universe is, that I think is part of our evolutionary journey. And to get to the next stage, we need to go through what we're going through. We need this data, we need this information, we need all this. Don't you feel, Tyler, that this is a necessary part to make the leap across the abyss?
Yeah, and it's happening. So we better learn to incorporate it into our psyche, right? Not just leave the, let's say, the technical discoveries as a world unto themselves, but right. I think, Laura, you're talking a lot about the integration of all this. So yes,
into our worldview. So we expand it, and we, Darwin said that there's competition and dog eat dog. No, I'm sorry. There's also cooperation, right? We're learning that there's other ways that biodiversity works to support and thrive. Cooperation is a big part of it. So we can't just pick and choose the lessons. We need to learn them all to understand, right? To employ.
And just like the radio show days where we interviewed you 3 times, I think we're going to need to continue to interview you in the future because otherwise we'll be here for another couple hours. But we do really, truly appreciate what you brought to the table today, your insight, your work, your scholarship. I think all of us are inspired, and hopefully, go ahead.
I would like to go into MetaPatterns and to look at each pattern and then your illustrations and then talk about how they work. I think that we've been on a long journey looking at the patterns of the universe and within us. And I think this is another discussion if you would like to.
I'd love to do that, Laura. Thank you, Paul, because they all can be applied from the physical to biological to cultural, psychological. So that would be a whole other that could be another discussion.
Well, it also would help us understand. For example, we talked with Mauro Zapatera about the cerebral spinal fluid and how the brain developed and enclosed the sea of fluid, and he's talking about the flat plane, and he showed us diagrams how it's folding up into a tube. So, example, you have that in your work. And we talked with Gerald Pollack about the fourth phase of water and how it likes tubules. It behaves differently in tubules, and it creates energy patterns. I mean, so these meta patterns we can see and go, oh yeah, of course. So I want those aha experiences. When you detail the various patterns from borders and spheres and planes and tubes and all the rest of it. So
and we've talked a lot about
even arrows. Even got arrows in there.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Beautiful. Well,
appreciate that.
Can we finish?
Yes, thank you. Please
Beautiful.
indulge
Well,
me.
no,
Thank
it's
you.
good. Fantastic, Tyler. I'm going to, before you hang up here, let everybody turn on your mics and thank Professor Volk for his participation today. Ask everybody
And
to
also
unmute.
Brian Swim and
Brian,
Monica and
yeah,
Tony and everyone.
Lynn,
Lynn, we want to
nice
hear more from
suggestions.
you
Yeah,
about
good.
systems.
So I don't hear anybody
And-
speaking, but say thank you to Tyler.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tyler.
I love your orientation.
Tyler. Good job. Great job.
Awesome, Ty.
Thank you, Lorley and
Awesome
Paul.
job.
Okay.
Blessings
Thank
to
you.
you all.
Blessings.
Good health for everybody. All right,
Okay.
let's stay in touch.